When I was little, I thought my father was a hero. He could tinker with everything. He could fix our creaky steps. He knew how to fix a leak in the roof. He could literally assemble a bicycle from a pile of iron and wires. His hands were always calloused and covered in oil, but it seemed to me that this is how the hands of a man who holds the whole world on his shoulders should look. Mom often said that I was a carbon copy of Dad, and I was proud of it. I tried to walk like him, to speak in his deep voice, to laugh with his low, throaty laugh. But times change, sometimes too quickly. When I was 10, everything collapsed. My father lost his job. The factory where he worked for more than 15 years closed overnight. At first, he tried to find something else. Then, he worked wherever he could. Mom worked 2 jobs. We lived poorly, but we held on. And then, he left. One morning I woke up and his things were gone. The smell of his tobacco in the hallway was gone. His shoes were gone by the door. His voice was gone at the kitchen table. All Mom said was, "Daddy's gone," to figure things out. I didn't understand. How could he just leave? How could he leave? I waited. Months. Years. Sometimes I thought I saw him on the street, a tall figure in a distant alley, a familiar set of shoulders, a familiar gait. I'd run after them, shouting, "Daddy," only to find a stranger. My father had become something of a ghost to me, an echo of a past that was too painful to remember and too scary to let go of. I was growing, learning to cope on my own, learning not to wait, learning not to believe. And yet, somewhere deep inside me, there was always a small, stubborn hope. At university, I majored in sociology, maybe because I was always trying to understand, why do people leave? Why do they abandon those they are supposed to love? I immersed myself in books, in lectures, in work. I built walls around myself. I had few close friends. Relationships were short, superficial. I thought that if I didn't let anyone get too close, I wouldn't have to experience betrayal again. My father was a shadow in my memory. Sometimes I wasn't even sure if he was real, or if I had just made him up. In my senior year, I interned at a local homeless center. I didn't expect much. I thought, what can I do? Hand out a few sandwiches, convince a couple of people to find shelter for the night. But I was wrong. Every person who came there carried with them a whole universe of pain. Job loss, divorce, illness, mistakes that society does not forgive. And among all those faces, one day, I saw him. He was sitting in the far corner of the room, hunched over, in a worn jacket, with gray hair sticking out in all directions. His face was hidden by a thick beard, but I recognized him. I froze, unable to move. It was him, my father. That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. I lay on my bed in my cramped, rented room, staring at the ceiling and replaying it all over again in my head. My father, homeless. Why didn't he come back? Why didn't he call? Why did he let me grow up thinking I was nothing to him? The next morning, I was the first one to arrive at the center, waiting. My heart was pounding in my throat, and he came. I approached him. He looked up, his eyes dull and tired. And nothing, no recognition, no surprise, just polite wariness, like all homeless people, taught to expect the worst. I sighed and said, "Hello, my name is Alex. How can I help you?" He nodded. Just food." I brought him a tray. He ate silently, carefully, slowly, as if he were afraid the food would disappear. And while he was eating, I looked at him and realized, behind those wrinkles, behind the dirt, but he was different. He was lost. And I didn't know how to feel. Love him? Hate him? I just sat there. And in that moment, I realized one important thing. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is just being there. We barely spoke for the next few weeks. I'd come to the center every day and find him there, in the far corner, eating, sometimes sleeping, curled up on a hard plastic chair. sometimes just sitting, staring at the wall. I wanted to tell him who I was. I wanted to scream, "It's me, your son." But something stopped me. Fear, pain, anger, and something deeper, the realization that he was no longer the man I once knew. One day, while wiping down tables after lunch, I overheard him telling another homeless man his story. "I had a son," he muttered. "A little boy with eyes like his mother. I loved him more than life itself, but I screwed up a lot. I thought that if I left, they'd be better off without me." I froze, rag in hand. He continued, "I was weak, too proud to ask for help, too cowardly to stay and fight, and then it was too late." His voice trembled. At that moment, I understood. He suffered too, all this time. He did not leave me because he did not love. He left because he did not know how to love properly, because he broke. And I, listening to his confession, suddenly felt how the heavy stone inside me began to melt. Not forgiveness, no, that was still far away, but understanding. And with understanding came the first crack in the wall that I had been building around my heart all these years. The next day, I approached him at the table. He was raising his spoon to his mouth when I sat down across from him. "Hi," I said quietly. He nodded, not looking up. I clutched my mug of tea, feeling my insides tighten. "You know," I began, then hesitated. "Sometimes people make mistakes, big mistakes, and sometimes, even then, they can still be forgiven." He looked at me, and for a brief moment, just a moment, recognition flashed in his eyes, like a lighthouse in a distant fog. He exhaled. "You look like my son," he whispered. I smiled through my tears. "Maybe because I am your son, Dad." His spoon fell from his hands. He froze like a statue, looking at me, as if afraid to believe it. I didn't wait for him to say anything. I simply reached across the table and touched his fingers. They were cold, rough, but alive. And that was enough. After that day, everything changed. Not right away, not quickly, but it changed. My father started coming to the center, not just for food. He helped. He set up chairs, washed dishes, wiped up spilled soups, as if he were fulfilling an invisible mission to regain a piece of dignity that he had lost many years ago. We started talking, at first, in short phrases, weather, food, news. Then, deeper. He talked about how, having lost his job, he broke from the inside. About the feeling of worthlessness that ate away at him day after day. About how shame prevented him from returning home. How the fear of rejection paralyzed him. "I thought that if I disappeared, it would be easier for you and Mom," he said one day, looking somewhere at the wall. I listened in silence. 1,000 feelings fought inside me. Anger, pity, sadness. But most of all, a strange, new feeling. The understanding that in front of me is a person, not a monster. Not perfect, just a man, broken, trying to climb out of his own personal hole. I began to see him not only as a father who had left, but as a man who suffered, loved in his own way, and ultimately wanted to fix something. We began to meet outside the center. Sometimes I would bring him clean clothes. Sometimes I would just sit with him on a bench in the park and listen. My father would talk about his dreams, how he wanted to open a workshop someday. "I know how to work with my hands, Alex," he would say, smiling slightly. "Maybe someone else will find it useful." There was hope in his voice, and it was more than I had ever dared to expect. One day, I offered him something. "Dad, I have a spare room," I said. "Nothing special, of course. Small, but warm and clean." "Alex," he paused, horror flashing in his eyes. "I can't. You expect too much from me. I'll disappoint you again." I looked at him firmly. "Maybe or maybe not, but Dad, Sometimes you have to give yourself a chance and let others believe in you. He was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. 2 days later, he moved in with me. It was strange, awkward, like two strangers trying to remember how to be a family. But we tried. He cleaned the apartment, cooked simple meals, fixed everything he found broken. Sometimes I caught him looking at me with sad pride, as if he didn't believe that this was really happening. We were learning each other all over again. And step by step, the thread that had once been torn apart. Several months passed. My father and I began to live in our own strange, imperfect, but real rhythm. Sometimes I caught myself thinking, it's almost like in childhood. Only then he was my hero. And now, just a person whom I tried to understand and accept. One day, I returned home late at night after a hard day at work. I found my father at the old kitchen table. In front of him lay rough sketches of furniture stools, benches, cabinets. He raised his head, his eyes shining. "Listen, Alex?" He hesitated, as if afraid to say too much. I was thinking, maybe I should try to open something of my own, a small workshop. For starters, furniture repair. I understand that I'm an old fool, and a lot of time has been lost. I sat down opposite him, tired, but for some reason with warmth in my chest. "Dad, if you're ready to try, I'll help." He smiled. That same smile I remembered from my distant childhood. And a month later, my father got a job in a small furniture repair shop. At first, he worked for food, then for a small fee. Slowly, persistently, day after day, he regained his self-respect. And I learned to let go of grudges. I learned to look at him not through the eyes of a boy who was abandoned, but through the eyes of an adult who understands. Everyone deserves a second chance. A year passed. A lot has changed. My father rented a small room in an old house nearby. He wanted to be independent, not to be a burden for me. I respected his decision. We saw each other every week. We had dinner together. We chatted. Sometimes we argued. Sometimes we sat in silence. And there was something amazing in this ordinariness. Something real. One day, he gave me a stool that he made with his own hands. On the leg, he carved a small inscription. "Forgiveness is the strongest house that can be built." I kept this stool as a treasure, and I understood our past has not disappeared. The pain has not gone away, but we have built something new in its place. Something real. Today, sitting on the veranda of my house, I write these lines. My father sits across from me, reading the newspaper, sipping coffee from his favorite cracked mug. He has grown old, hunger, but there is peace in his eyes. Sometimes I think about that boy who waited for his father to call by the window, who looked for him in the faces of passers-by, who carried this emptiness inside himself for many years. And I want to tell him, you can handle it. Yes, it will hurt. Yes, it will be hard. But one day, you will understand. Sometimes, those who hurt you can still be part of your happiness. Sometimes salvation comes not in the form of perfect people, but in the form of broken souls who still know how to love. My father was homeless. He was lost. He was imperfect. But it was through this imperfection that I learned the most important thing. I learned to love unconditionally. I learned to forgive. And I learned